Each year, more than 46 million Americans will seek emergency room treatment for an accidental injury, most of which are preventable. So, what are your risks, and who can you trust to protect you? This is Safety Matters with Russ Kenzior.
This is America's slip and fall guy, Russ Kenzior, and you're listening to Safety Matters.
Safety Matters in the news.
As you probably already know, I like starting the show out talking about the most important safety matter in the news, and that's the coronavirus. I received an email from a listener this past week asking a question about OSHA and whether or not OSHA requires that employers provide their employees face masks, face coverings, face shields, etc., and what really constitutes the requirement under OSHA for personal protective equipment, or PPE. And interestingly, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration just published guidance on the subject, and it's guidance as to the use of cloth face coverings by employees that are working in hot or humid conditions while indoors. Note, there's certain guidelines here, and it begins with face coverings, specifically cloth face coverings, and secondly, employees that are working in hot and humid conditions indoors, which many people do. OSHA generally has recommended that employers provide face coverings at work to help reduce the spread of COVID-19, but really up until now hasn't had any formal guidance. Workers who wear cloth face coverings in hot, humid environments or while performing strenuous activities indoors, like, working in a bakery, a kitchen, laundries, etc., they find it really hard to wear cloth face coverings throughout the course of the day just because they're uncomfortable and it's difficult for them to breathe. And so OSHA put out a list, and I'm going to just give you top 10 areas that they're focused on, whereby they now recommend that employers follow these practices to protect against the spread of COVID-19 and the risk of heat-related illnesses. And that's the key here. Face coverings make it difficult for people to breathe. And if you're working in a strenuous job, you're lifting boxes, you're exerting a lot of energy, and you're breathing heavy, it's difficult sometimes to breathe wearing a face covering. So first thing OSHA is asking is that employers kind of acclimate their workers when they're returning back to work, kind of get them used to wearing a cloth face covering throughout the course of the day, kind of acclimate them, get them, again, comfortable wearing a cloth face covering. Secondly, they're asking to employers to prioritize the use of cloth face coverings when working in close contact with other people. And they refer to close contact or define that as less than 6 feet. And so, such as doing group travel, shift meetings, breaks, that kind of thing. So they also allow workers to remove cloth face coverings when they can safely maintain at least 6 feet of personal distance from other employees. So if you're not too close to other workers, OSHA does not require that you even wear a face covering. They also go on to say that they want employers to evaluate the feasibility of wearing cloth face coverings for each worker and consider alternatives like face shields when appropriate. Another point is OSHA's asking that employers provide some increase in frequency for hydration, rest breaks, provide employees a cool environment if possible as to reduce heat-related stress. They're also asking employers to enhance ventilation throughout the work site, break rooms, that sort of thing, and allow workers to return to their vehicles during breaks or to use, air conditioning in the building if possible. And they do not want multiple workers to return at the same time from the same car. They don't want people mixing it up as to limit the spread of coronavirus. And then lastly, they want employers to ensure that their workers are properly washing their hands and using appropriate hand sanitizers, ones that have a minimum of 60% alcohol. Because heat and moisture can build up, people sweat, and if you're wiping your face, you're wiping your mask, etc., you can transmit the coronavirus by contact, not necessarily by breathing. And so OSHA does have some guidance on the subject of prevention of the coronavirus. Of course, all of this is in line with the federal government's recommendations. These are the recommendations we've been living with for months, as published by the CDC, the National Institutes of Health, etc. And so OSHA plays a big role in employee safety. And in fact, when we come back, I'm going to be interviewing Ed Foulke, who was the former Assistant Director of Labor under George W. Bush and head of OSHA. And we'll be talking about where OSHA is today, what's the role of OSHA, specifically as it applies to the spreading of the coronavirus, when Safety Matters returns.
Safety Matters with Russ Kenzier will be right back.
This is America's Slip and Fall Guy, Russ Kenzier, and welcome back to Safety Matters. I would be remiss if I was not to talk about the perception of safety, what people think, what people's opinions are. Most of the time, people really don't have data or studies. They base their opinions on kind of a gut feel. For example, if I was to ask an average person, which is more likely a location for you to be injured or die? Would it be at home? Or would it be on the job? And surprisingly, most people think that workplace safety is far more dangerous than home safety, when in fact it's the complete opposite. In fact, in the workplace last year, 2018 data, over 103 million lost days were faced by industry in the United States due to injuries. About 70 million of those were, again, a form of an injury. 33 million were due to injuries in prior years, meaning people that were hurt prior to 2018 and were still experiencing time off the job. And 55 million is projected to be the number of lost days for these people in the future. So as somebody gets hurt on the job or in the workplace, it has long-lasting effects. The costs associated with workplace safety are also a bit staggering. In 2018, it was estimated that about $171 billion was spent on workplace-related injuries, and that's about $1,100 per worker, and just over $1 million. In fact, it's about $1,190,000 per death. But I think what really captivates a lot of people's attention, and it's the political season, is the cost for medical injuries, medical-related costs, and that's roughly about $41,000 per employee per injury. And so workplace safety is a big deal, and it's one that needs to be addressed. And who better than to talk about the subject of workplace safety as the former head of OSHA, Ed Foulke. Ed, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Russ. Appreciate it for having me here today.
No, thank you. You're a partner today at Fisher & Phillips Law Group in Atlanta, and you're also part of the D.C. Metro office. You're the former co-chair of your firm's Workplace Safety and Catastrophe Management Practice Group and president of the Fisher Phillips Safety Solutions, LLC. As I mentioned, you are the former head of OSHA. You served under President George W. Bush from 2006 to 2008. But what a lot of people may not know about you, Ed, is that during your tenure, OSHA's workplace injury and illness fatality rates dropped to really the lowest level in recorded history. Is that correct?
Yes, at that time, we were very focused on trying to help employers have the tools that they needed to be able to help them be successful and reduce their injury and illnesses. With the ultimate goal, I think, and this is true for every employer, that the more that you can help reduce injuries, the more you can reduce illnesses, but particularly injuries, then the more you're going to be reducing your workers' comp costs and all the associated costs. And one of the things that used to be that it was the rule of thumb for what it costs to injure an employee was about 2 times your workers' comp costs. But the more recent studies indicate that that's really the true cost of injuring employees, actually 5 times your workers' comp costs. So the more that we can, as a country, and the more that every employer and every company can reduce their injuries, then the amount of savings is really going to be dramatic, which in turn means that they're going to be more profitable, more competitive, be able to grow, expand, whatever. So safety really is a critical element for them to be able to help protect their employees, to get them home safe and sound each and every night to their families and loved ones. But at the same time, and these work together, that they can help them become more profitable and competitive. So,
no, and again, the perception by members of the general public, our audience today, is very often different than the reality. For example, and again, in my world of slip, trip, and fall prevention, a lot of people completely underestimate just how big of a problem or crisis it is. In fact, going back to the National Safety Council's injury facts data for 2018, overexertion, slips, trips, and falls, and contact with objects are the top 3 non-fatal injuries involving days away from work, according to the National Safety Council. But when you look at deaths, workplace deaths, number 1 is transportation incidents, violence, and other injuries, and rounding out the top 3 is slips, trips, and falls.
Right.
When you and I worked together, when you were at OSHA, we were involved in rewriting the rule for walkway safety, working walking surfaces. And let's go back in time, Ed. Let's go back to the time that you were in OSHA, and what were you facing? What were some of the obstacles? What were some of the projects that you were really spearheading at the time?
Well, once again, our focus, I was trying to focus as much on compliance assistance as we were doing with enforcement. I mean, OSHA's always had a fairly strong enforcement, or what I consider a strong enforcement mechanism, and that's important. But I think more so, having a robust compliance assistance program where you are out there trying to help employers to be safe. To me, that's really the focus that we need to be. That I thought was the focus needed. And at the same time, one of the things I was looking at is trying to move. We were focusing much more on trying to get employers to look more at leading indicators than lagging indicators. And unfortunately, that's what OSHA looks at a lot of times. Is they're going to look at a company's DART rate, their injury and illness rates, their fatality rates. Those are the numbers, and all those things are things that have occurred in the past. Now, they are useful metrics for a company, but they're not the ones that are going to drive it to improve their safety. I mean, if you want to, a company can get down, and unfortunately, a company can actually statistically could get down to 0 injuries, illnesses, or DART rate of 0, a lost time injury and illness rate of 0, and have a lousy safety program. I mean, it's statistically possible. It's not sustainable, but so that's why moving away from the lagging indicators and going more to the leading indicators, to me, was a really important focus to try to do that. And at the same time, we were looking at risk, trying to get more focused on risk in the workplace. I mean, and this is something the safety profession, unfortunately, lags behind some, is kind of been lagging on some things. It's like moving away from lagging indicators to leading indicators. Now we're looking much more at that than we have in the past. But for decades, our metrics from the safety profession was injury and illness rates and DART rates. It really was. So, and then this idea about risk, looking at risk with hazards, safety and health risk in the workplace that are hazardous to employees. If you look, the insurance industry, probably 2 decades ago, 20 years ago, was doing basically, they were looking at the same thing that OSHA was looking at. They were looking at lagging indicators. They were looking at lost time injury rates, DART rates. They were looking at the company's safety program, and they'd say, well, this client we have here, they got their DART rates and injuries rates are kind of low, and they look at these safety manuals. They got all kinds of manuals that are doing all this training, and so they were basing their rates, rating their risk on that. Based on that. And then all of a sudden they figured out they were losing a lot of money, because it turned out those were not really needed to be the focus. And at that point, the insurance industry moved to a risk-based analysis for determining rates. And like I say, that was 20 plus years ago. And now the safety profession is moving finally now in that direction, where we're looking much more at risk, looking at leading indicators than we have than we ever have in the past, and that's a good thing. So, but we still have to continue to move in that direction.
No, you bring up a good point, and I think the perception by most people is that government moves very slowly, and that it ultimately takes a disaster before anything changes. I mean, the leading and lagging indicator ideas that you mentioned is almost always, at least from the government's perspective, lagging. We wait until there's a crisis, and then government runs out and spends billions of dollars to try to remedy the crisis, only to wait for the next one to come along. You brought up an excellent point about the insurance industry, the actuaries that work for the insurance industry, and I like to refer to them as little gremlins that nobody ever knows about, very powerful people that work in the insurance industry that determine everyone's premiums. Oftentimes they get it wrong. And when they get it wrong, it can really be very, very costly. But let's speed up the clock here. Let's say you were the head of OSHA today. What would you do differently, or how would you approach your job today?
Well, I think we'd be looking once again. I think there's a chance that what was at the time when I was there back in 2006 to the 3 years I was there, 2006 to 2008. Really the focus, or at least my focus, was very much on BPP and also alliances and partnerships with trade associations, because that was one thing I thought I was trying to figure out, how does OSHA get to as many employers as possible, and particularly the small and medium-sized employers, because those are the ones that have the greatest need, have the least resources. And so how can we do that? And so I thought through partnerships and alliances particularly that you could help develop best practices, model policies that could be used in their industry, because it could then be industry specific, which is what we were trying to focus on those. And then also on the VPP, because it was shown that the VPP sites, companies that are in VPP, their sites are much more, they have a lower injury and illness rates. They're significantly lower than in their industry average, and so that to me was where I was focused at the time. Today, I think one thing that has come in the focus here that you didn't have back then was now we have this ISO 45001 Safety and Health Management System, and it's a certification program too. And Z10, which has been the American safety standard, has now been harmonized and updated and revised and harmonized with ISO 45001. And so we have a program now, a continuous improvement program that will help companies. If they have a good safety program, it's going to take them to the next level to move. You'll move from a good safety program to a great safety program, and potentially, I think, if you're willing to focus on the things, to a world-class safety program. And that, to me, is where I would like to see us kind of go. I'd like to see OSHA go that way. Maybe look to incentivize somehow the companies to get into 45,001. And unfortunately, the VPP program, they've had. It's a great program. They've done a really good job, but unfortunately, it's been in place for almost 30 years, approximately 30 years. And there's only roughly 1,800 sites in the VPP program. To me, that doesn't drive safety. That's just a small number. We got to get it where we have hundreds of thousands of companies into some type of safety certification program. And one reason I actually worked on I was on the technical advisory committee for the United States that helped draft the 45,001, which is an international standard. There were about 140 countries that were involved in the program, and it got finalized. The standard was 45,001 came out in March of 2018. So it's been out for almost 2 years, I guess now. And so I think this is a new area that more and more companies are going to have to look to to help improve their safety and health program and dramatically improve it. I mean, if you follow the things there, it's not going to be easy, but nothing good is ever easy. And so, and this is going to really help move companies have improved safety, really reduce injuries and illnesses, particularly injuries. That is really and it's a risk-based system. Once again, it was designed to be a risk-based system. And we're very, I was glad I'm still on the committee. We're drafting now guidance documents for small and medium-sized companies of how to implement the 45,001 at their company. Because when we designed this system, one of the things that we really, and it's particularly in the United States, we were very focused on making sure that this was something that all companies, small, medium, large, all could get into the system, get into this, and be certified in the program. And that's where I think that's kind of, to me, was where safety and health is going, risk-based, and it looks at things that a lot of the other safety programs have never, have looked at in the past. Like, particularly, one of the things that I see is that the 45,001 talks about workers, which encompasses all, even management. But it also talks about other interested parties and having your safety program look at all these other interested parties. And obviously, other interested parties can be vendors and suppliers who are on the site, the public if they're on site. But it also talks about, it looks about other interested party, covers other people. It's like what's inside your fence that can impact people, or maybe the town down the street, and impact those citizens of that town. And at the same time, it also looks at what's outside your fence. I.e., are you next to some type of chemical company that manufactures ammonia? And could they have a leak? And how is that going to impact your employees? So it's a much broader type of review and a much more encompassing review of safety across the board. And that's, I think, is one of the benefits of it. So.
No, and that's an excellent point. I mean, safety is something that has to be comprehensive. It has to be part of the culture, part of our daily activities. It has to be front and center. In fact, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about that, the perception of safety and some of the things that you and your firm are doing now in this age of coronavirus, when Safety Matters returns.
Safety Matters with Russ Kenzier will be right back.
Welcome back to Safety Matters. I've been speaking with Ed Foulke, former head of OSHA, and now with the Fisher & Phillips firm out of Atlanta, Georgia, and Washington, D.C. We've been talking about perception and safety. And I remember a number of years ago, you telling me a story regarding you had a site visit at a company, and the owner of the company came out and shook your hand and was so excited to tell you how safety was number one. And I remember to this day that your response is, no, it's not. Profits are number one, because profits drive safety. Do you remember that story where you?
A lot of times I got that. I remember when I was at OSHA, I got to meet a lot of, I got a lot of meetings of Fortune 100 company presidents and CEOs. But I got another thing, which was probably even more important. I got to meet a lot of mom and pop owners and operators, which was a real blessing. And it's good to see the difference. But yeah, a lot of the whenever I knew I was going to meet with a CEO company, president of the company, I would ask the staff to look at what their injury and illness rates were and how they compared to the industry average. And then I always looked on their website. I looked on the company's website, and I was looking at their mission, vision, value statements. So. And when I would meet them, I'd be talking, and of course they would always say that yes, safety is number one at their company, and a lot of them probably believed it. And I would look at them and say, well, if that's I was looking at your website, and I was looking at your mission, vision, value statement. Oh, they would get all excited about that. So yes, we worked very hard on our mission, vision, value statement. I said, well, it's interesting that when I looked on there, your value statement does not say one word about the safety and health of your employees. And so, how can safety be number one if you can't even have on your mission statement or your vision statement or your values or your value that you value employees and you value them, that they go home safe and sound each and every night to their families and loved ones?
No, and that's an excellent point. When a big company, again, this is perception. People think, when a big company violates OSHA and there's a fatality or a major explosion, whatever it might be, there's a disaster. Generally speaking, the public thinks, well, OSHA needs to get in there and fine them. Well, okay. Again, it's all after the fact. I mean, the disaster's already happened. And sadly, for a lot of big companies, because you mentioned mom and pops, and they operate on a completely different level. And they really make up the backbone of our country. But the big companies, you fine them, and it's part of the cost of doing business. I mean, sadly, many of them absorb the fine, will pass it along to their customers by way of the cost of goods or services. And it doesn't always change behavior. And I know some of your predecessors have taken this really strong approach on violations. What's punish companies for violating OSHA's rules. And I know you've had a different view of that because it doesn't always work. I mean, you can hit them with a fine, and for many companies, they just absorb it and they don't change their behavior. We're a mom and pop. I mean, for a small business to have an employee injured or die is a catastrophe. I mean, oftentimes it's a family member, it's somebody who they know personally and worked with for many, many years. It's just a different perception. But, the corporate side, you want to beat them up. Well, have at it. In your experience, Ed, did you see a lot of change come from, big fines?
I always with respect to enforcement, there are some employers, what OSHA always seems to call the bad apples. But, in my dealings, and I've been doing this since 1980, people used to say, how did you get involved in safety and health? And I told them it was by accident, but it was actually by a fatality. I was at a client site. I was 2 years out of law school. I was there to do supervisory training on labor and employment issues. And one of my client's employees it was a construction company. He was standing halfway up a 6-foot ladder. So he's 3 feet off the ground, fell backwards and got killed. And that's how I got involved in safety and health. And that tells me that people die very easily. So that's why safety is so critically important. But, I think, but you do have some bad apples. There are people out there that for some reason, and don't ask me why, I've been very blessed. I haven't really had any clients that have been like that. Usually I can convince them how they need to improve their safety program during and after an OSHA inspection. But, it was just like my feeling is that most employers, they really want to do the right thing. Unfortunately, accidents happen. And, I don't think the idea that you think, if anybody thinks that that in the United States we could get to 0 injuries and illnesses or 0 fatalities, I don't believe that. I just don't think that that's physically possible. Even if you had 1 million OSHA inspectors, I don't think you could get to that point. You would improve it much, but then it has improved dramatically. So the question becomes, well, who you got all these small employers particularly, they want to do the right thing, but they don't have the resources. They don't even have the knowledge. I mean, I look at the Federal Register. I get the Federal Register emailed to me every day. And I see all the new standards, what OSHA's working on, all the different stuff when it's published. I see them. Small employer can't do that. And so they're just out there trying to figure out how they're trying to run the business. A lot of these small and medium-sized employers, but particularly the small employers, they're not only the production manager, they're the owner, they're the production manager, they're the HR manager, they're the safety manager, and they just can't. It's impossible. So how do we help them? Because they want the help, and they'll be more than happy. They'll try to do the right things if you kind of explain to them, and that's why I think we got to figure out a system. And that was what I was trying to do. I think with respect to the working with the trade associations and the partnerships and alliances, that was very important. And the BPP, they were doing a lot of outreach to other companies. But once again, we got to get to all employers, and that's the big challenge. And that I think we got to do some things a little bit differently than's being done now, or have been done for decades at OSHA. I mean, they're celebrating 50 years. I think today. This year, the act was passed in 1970, so we're talking 50 years, and there's been a tremendous reduction in injuries, illness, and fatalities from 1970 to now. How much? I don't know how much you can attribute that to OSHA. I mean, I think there's probably a good percentage of that you can, but once again, you gotta have the enforcement for those people that don't want to do it. But the vast majority of people or just don't care. The vast majority of people do care, and so we got to figure out how do we help them become safe and help them become, arguably improve their safety program, reduce their injuries, illnesses, and make them more profitable, competitive. So, which will strengthen the country generally.
And I agree. I think the biggest success of OSHA has been awareness, safety awareness. And, our profession, the safety profession, has really done a pretty bad job in terms of public persona. Generally, when a safety person is on site for a large company, the view from the employers is, the employees are, oh boy, here's the safety guy. Everybody's got to you get scared. He's like the cop. Here comes the cop. We got to get everything, safe because the cop's coming. And that perception of safety professionals is one that's just been really hard to turn around. We're on a smaller company, smaller businesses. Safety is just kind of normal for them. I mean, they want help. They want assistance. They're looking for resources. But sadly, the safety profession hasn't done a very good job, Ed, in my opinion, of just really putting its best face forward and selling safety as part of the mainstream business, especially today in the world of coronavirus, where so many companies are just strapped. I mean, they're not even able to open. And to that point, at your company, Fisher & Phillips has some wonderful resources on the website dealing with coronavirus. In fact, we're going to put this up on the website. I'm looking at a story that came out in July on your website entitled, "How Should Your Business Handle Anti-Mask Guests? A 5-Step Action Plan." And it's just such a really simple approach to managing that subject matter, because it's a reality. There's a lot of businesses, large and small, where people are resistant to wearing masks, and others are angry if another person in the room is not wearing a mask. And tell us a little bit, Ed, about how Fisher & Phillips is helping your clients in this world of coronavirus.
Right, and that was one thing. We actually, when this all started, we had a group of attorneys that. And it wasn't just safety people. We had a number of safety. We have probably the largest, Fisher Phillips probably have this largest safety practice group in the country of any law firm, because we got over 30 lawyers that just do mostly safety and health, do OSHA work. So we had people from that group, but we also had other groups included in that, because safety has, in these issues, these are not just safety issues, they're also EEOC issues, ADA issues, stuff, so we had a lot of people. So we started developing a lot of practical advice. We were putting out a lot of information. We've received a lot of, I know Google said that we had one of the largest hits we had of any coronavirus websites. I think we had, I can't remember if it was 50 million or 500 million. It was a big number. That's all I remember. And so we've really put in, there's a lot of really practical information, because that's one thing that Fisher Phillips is very noted for, is that the practical type of information that we provide our clients there. And if you go on the website, that's the nice thing too. We figure it's important that we provide that information. So if you go on the Fisher Phillips, and it's just Google Fisher Phillips and get the home page. As soon as you get to the home page, you're going to be, you scroll down about part way, not very far, and all of a sudden you're in the middle of all the coronavirus materials, because it's broken down into different segments, so you can see what it tells you about information about just generally on pandemics, about handling the pandemic. It talks about there's a section on returning to work. How do you deal with those things? You mentioned about the mask, because once again, the mask issue. It's a safety issue, but it's also an ADA issue. And so you're going to have to you have to determine how you go about figuring out how you're going to make reasonable accommodations for masks. And we were talking a little bit earlier, we mentioned about, on their website too, you're going to see something on vaccinations. This is the next big issue. And you need to be aware of that, when the vaccine now, they're talking about having sites up by November 1st to start giving out, distributing vaccines. What are you going to do? Are you going to mandate vaccines? Are you going to mandate the flu vaccine? Are you going to mandate the coronavirus vaccine? And you have those rights, but also it's not an absolute right. It's, you still once you have the question about it. You got Americans with Disability, ADA. You have to make a reasonable accommodation for those employees, and that's what the guidance is trying to help. So, and this is how safety and health should be working. They should be working within their HR department, talking about employment issues. Maybe have some labor issues too, in part of this coronavirus. And you're going to see as you go through the website, you're going to see a whole bunch of things there that talk about all these different things. But clearly, you're going to see more and more, and unfortunately, you're also starting to see more litigation. And as more people come back to work or open their operations, well, there's certain people aren't going to be brought back. And they're going to be wondering why they weren't brought, while somebody else was brought back. And they're going to start saying, well, I probably was because I talked about safety or whatever, or my age, race, sex, or whatever. So obviously it must be some type of discrimination or retaliation because I complained about safety. And so OSHA can get involved, the EEOC can get involved, so you're talking about a whole different things, potentially bringing lawsuits against you. And with respect to coronavirus, there's a lot of issues. And I'll just kind of give my normal spiel that I do to my clients on coronavirus with respect to these litigations. Please, please, please make sure that you're following the CDC guidance and the OSHA guidance. And it's not hard to pull that stuff up. And so you need to be following those because that will help protect you from litigation, negligence type of lawsuits being brought. You're seeing more and more wrongful death actions now being brought because of people who do that. So you need to be aware of that. And there's all these other types of lawsuits. Once again, so make sure you're following that guidance. The second thing is please make sure that you have a coronavirus action plan or control plan. Because first of all, if you get OSHA inspection, they're going to ask to see it. If you're in Indiana, you are required, the governor has set forth the requirements for a COVID-19 safety and health plan. You've got to have those things in place. You're required to have that. Matter of fact, in Indiana, they're even saying they have an enforcement program there, which involves Indiana OSHA as kind of the coordinator. But it also has enforcement people, and they're also talking about the state police being involved in helping enforce the governor's executive orders. So I don't know if you'll see more of that type of thing. You may, but like I say, please follow the guidance. Have your COVID-19 safety plan, control plan, whatever you want to call it. I don't care, but which will cover, use of masks, screening. Health screening of employees, make sure asking them the questions about before they come in, taking their temperature before they come in, social distancing, sanitation, training. Those are the things that you got to have. And if you're doing all those things, you're going to be able to avoid these negligent lawsuits because, if it's a worker, the question becomes a lot of these times on COVID-19 illnesses among an employee, did he or she contract it at work or someplace else? So if it's at work, arguably you have your workers' comp protection, the bars, so that limits your liability. If it's not, you may have suits being brought against you from negligence because you didn't require everyone to wear masks, or you didn't have your signage out there that says keep 6 feet apart, or you weren't doing the sanitation on a regular basis. That's the type of lawsuits that you're seeing out there right now, and it's only going to grow, unfortunately.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And the world of coronavirus has changed us, I believe, Ed, for a very, very long time. I mean, it just started. Whether you get the vaccine or not, don't forget, this is flu season on the way. There's just regular flus coming too. And right. The argument can be made, well, why don't you follow the same procedures every year for the flu prevention as you did for coronavirus. I mean, after all, the flu kills a lot of people as well. And then, as you said, when you throw attorneys into the mix, I'm going to bet, Ed, there's going to be attorneys specializing in these types of cases in the months and years to come. That there's
I think you're already seeing some of the plaintiffs' law firms, plaintiffs' bar, holding webinars. I don't know pretty much no one's doing the in-person seminars, but the webinars are out there already talking about these are the type of legal actions you can be brought. How do you get around workers' compensation, bar, and so you need, and like I say, if you have someone that dies of COVID-19, you really have the potential for a wrongful death action is there, so you need to be concerned about that.
Well, I've been speaking with Ed Foulke, partner at the Fisher & Phillips Law Group in Atlanta, and former Assistant Secretary of Labor for Occupational Safety and Health, and really appreciate you joining us.
This is Russ Kenzior, and welcome back to the show. I've been asked by quite a few people, why is it that you are called America's slip and fall guy? And the answer is because I have a very difficult last name to pronounce. And so most people that know me professionally will say Russ, the slip and fall guy. And so that's kind of the moniker that's kind of stuck with me for many, many years. I also have a podcast called Slip and Fall Guy, which is available on both Apple and Google Podcasts, and been very popular. And it talks about the subject of slips, trips, and falls, specifically as relates to preventing those types of injuries. Slips and falls are the leading cause of accidental injury in the United States. I don't know how many of you actually know that, but the likelihood that you would die as a result of a fall is about the same as you dying from the result of an automobile accident. About 1 out of 110 people will die as a result of a slip and fall, trip and fall, or other type of fall, as well as those who die in automobile crashes. So it's a really, really big problem that gets almost no attention, very, very little attention. That is, unless you are the victim of a fall, and then it can be life changing or result in a fatality. Many of you know people who have been the victim of a slip and fall or a trip and fall, and it's been a devastating injury. Again, primarily aimed towards the elderly. So our older listeners are far more interested in this subject than, say, our younger listeners, because the likelihood of a fall taking place to an elderly person is significantly higher, as is the injury, far more serious than to a younger person. It's estimated, according to the Centers for Disease Control, that about 7 to 8 million people this year will seek emergency room treatment for an accidental fall, making it the number one cause of emergency room visits. Now, that may be surpassed by coronavirus, so I'm hesitant on giving you an exact number, but historically it's been somewhere between 6 and 7 and 7 to 8 million people a year that seek emergency room treatment for a fall. So it's a very, very serious problem. Again, most people that are affected are the elderly, primarily women over the age of 65. The costs range anywhere between $100 and $150 billion a year. So it's very, very expensive. Slips and falls, trips and falls, are the most common type of workplace injury. It's also the most common form of guest injury for retailers, hospitals, industrial locations, office buildings, kind of going down the list, casinos. Just about every business has some problem with accidental slips, trips, and falls. And so it's a really big and expensive problem that most people know very little about. Now, ironically, as the host of Safety Matters, I have not really spent a lot of time talking about same level slips, trips, and falls, which is my area of expertise. And so next week, we're going to set two firsts for Safety Matters. The first is going to be an entire episode dedicated to slip, trip, and fall prevention. And the second thing is it will be the last show for Safety Matters, at least as broadcasted on AM 660 here in Dallas. The show is now going to be exclusively online. As I mentioned a moment ago, I've had a very popular podcast called Slip and Fall Guide, and that's now called Safety Matters. And so for all of you that want to continue listening to the show, the content, all you have to do is go to your iPhone and look under Apple or Google Podcasts, whichever's on your phone, or through our website, the Safety Matters Show.com. And you can listen to the podcast. The podcast, as I mentioned, has been out for about a year and has a lot of interesting content on it. And so Safety Matters will now be available exclusively online as a podcast. But as I said, next week I'm going to commit the entire show to slip and fall prevention. Going to be interviewing a safety expert on slip and fall testing, measuring of slip resistance of floors. And so I would ask that you join me next week for the first Safety Matters show to talk about my area of expertise, slip, trip, and fall prevention. And it will also be the last Safety Matters show to be broadcast here in Dallas on AM 660. So I look forward to you joining me next week on Safety Matters. Until then, don't let your next step be your last step.